But the sermon today, actually in verse 29, at the end of the chapter there, it says, "Seest thou a man diligent in his business? He shall stand before kings. He shall not stand before mean men." And that term mean means basically average. And if you remember in math class, you had median, mean, what was mean, the average, okay? And so that's just what that means, meaning that you're going to stand before kings. You're not going to stand before basically just average people. You know, you're going to stand before the high ups, right? And what I wanted to preach about is being a man diligent in his business, or a woman diligent in her business. And basically, this sermon is more so about being busy and not being idle, okay? And Proverbs hits this a lot as far as not being slothful, not being idle, but being diligent and being someone that's a hard worker, okay? And I just want to preach on this because not only is it going to be profitable for you to be a diligent man or woman, but it's also going to keep you out of trouble, okay? If there's anything to learn from this, is that if you're diligent, if you're someone that's working hard and you're doing a bunch of stuff and you're trying to get everything done, it's going to be hard for you to get into trouble, okay? And someone that doesn't have a lot to do, and they have, you know, you ever heard of the phrase, the idle mind is the devil's workshop? That's not in the Bible as far as that phrase, but that concept's there, meaning that if you're idle, you tend to get into trouble, you tend to do things you shouldn't do, and all that. Now, the word diligent, you know, I was just looking up like just the definition of what it is. I mean, it's just an adjective, you know, so someone that's diligent in their work or anything like that. But it says constant in effort to accomplish something, attentive and persistent in doing anything, done or pursued with persevering attention, painstaking, meaning that someone that's basically just, I'm going to get this done, and it doesn't matter what it takes, and they're constant, or what I would use is consistent, you know, someone that's just consistently doing something and getting the job done. And, you know, this is something that we need to learn in our lives as far as not being lazy. And if there's something that I'm always like praying to God is that, Lord, help me not to be lazy, okay? Now, the Bible term that they use for this is sluggard or slothful, okay? And when it comes to this, you know, this is something we need to always be working on as far as being diligent, not being slothful, not being a sluggard, not being lazy, but just being diligent in what we do and being busy, okay? And I was actually mowing the grass last evening, and it started raining on me. And I have a hillside, so I was like, man, I got to get this done, you know? And it was like I was like halfway done with the back part of the yard, but I just remember, and I'm always going to I bring up stories with my dad because obviously I grew up with him, but I still remember this what happened this one time. I was mowing the grass, and it started raining, and I wasn't done yet, and I basically just was going to go take the mower to the garage and just stop mowing. My dad's like, no, you need to get out there and finish that. And I was kind of mad at first, you know, because I'm like, it's raining, you're going to make me mow the grass in the rain. And but after that, I was like, you know what? It needed to get done, and, you know, I didn't melt. But it was one of those things where it just taught me a lesson early in life that, hey, it's not always going to be sunshine and roses when you're doing work, and it's not always going to be the best situation that you're going to be in when it comes to doing work. And I was mowing grass, and it was raining on me, and I was just thinking about my dad telling me, like, get it done. And obviously I was like, my dad wasn't saying that, but I was saying that to myself. I was like, I need to get this done. You know, I'm not going to just get it halfway done and then, you know, have to mow it later or whatever. And I survived. I didn't slide down the hill or cut off my leg or anything like that. So all I have to say is that, you know, those are types of lessons that I've learned as far as being diligent, being someone that just gets the job done, and it doesn't matter the conditions. And obviously, you know, when I say that, you know, you got to take some safety into account. So, I mean, if it's lightning outside and you're sitting on a metal, you know, it wasn't thunderstorming. My dad didn't have me out there in a lightning storm, okay, doing the lawn. It was just pretty much just light raining, okay. So obviously you don't want to be dumb about it, but you do want to just basically get the job done. And if you get wet or if you get muddy or you get dirty, you know what? You need to get the job done, okay. And so that's just kind of a you know, just an illustration as far as, you know, working. It's not always going to be the best situation. It's not always going to be the most fun situation to get the job done, but, a lot of times you have to get it done. I think of Brother Dave, with his job and, punching himself in the face, taking trash out of it. What I'm saying is that it's not always clean. It's not always something that's going to be fun. There's going to be days that are going to be easier. There's going to be days that are harder. But you know what? It's better to have a job where you're working hard, you're diligent, and you're not idle. Okay? And, going on some verses here, go to Proverbs chapter 10. We're going to just be in Proverbs for a little bit here, just kind of seeing this. And it is a dichotomy between being diligent and being slothful, being idle. Okay, those are polar opposites. And Proverbs 10, verse 4, it says, "He becometh poor that dealeth with a slack hand, but the hand of the diligent maketh rich. He that gathereth in summer is a wise son, but he that sleepeth in harvest is a son that causeth shame." Now, there's another verse that I didn't put in here, but it talks about how they basically a person, like a slothful person, won't go out and sow because it's cold. Okay, because it's cold, and then they're not going to have anything for the harvest. Okay, and there's a lot of verses you can go to with this, and Proverbs is just filled with this. But it comes down to this, they're lazy, and they're not gathering in the summer, right? And then they're sleeping in the harvest, meaning that they're not gathering up the fruit. It's all there. It's just right there, ready for them to pick it, but they won't do it because guess what? That takes time, it takes labor, and it's not going to be easy. But also on the flip side, before you even get to the harvest, as far as going out there and doing it when it's not fun, right? It's still cold. You're like, man, it's cold. It's it's like 20, like 40 degrees outside. And, why I'm out here planting these seeds and all this other stuff. And it's not always going to be fun. It's not always going to be the best ideal situation. But the person that does it in the cold, and the person that does gather in the summer, and you say, well, why is it talking about gathering in the summer? Because it's hot in the summertime. Okay, let's be honest. It's hot. You don't want to do it in the summertime because, it's just not comfortable. Harvest is comfortable because it's usually cooler. That's my favorite time of year, honestly, is fall, because it's just not super humid, but summertime's humid. And anybody that has a garden knows that you have to pick that stuff during the summer, or it's just all going to rot. And if you don't pick it, then other stuff's not going to grow in its place. And so, my brother's not here who's like got the green thumb, but he would tell you the same thing. And there's certain things, my dad will know about this, dealing with cucumbers, right? Those things, you got to get those things as soon as they're getting ripe, right? And then you pluck those things because they'll turn yellow, orange, and then they're just mush, And so that takes diligence, that takes, basically integrity to basically go out there, especially when it's hot and stuff like that. Now, going on to Proverbs chapter 12, I just want to show you some verses on this. Being diligent, not being slothful. Proverbs 12, verse 24, it says, "The hand of the diligent shall bear rule, but the slothful shall be under tribute." Now, this kind of goes hand in hand with that verse that we read at the beginning, where it says, "Seest thou a man diligent in his business, he shall stand before kings." Okay? And what this really shows you is that someone that's hardworking, consistent, that they're not lazy, those people are going to end up being leaders in whatever they do. Okay? You think about this with any job in a lot of cases. Let's just say you work for a fast food restaurant or something like that. And let's say you were just there doing your job and all that stuff, and you're just really working hard. You're going to be a manager before you know it, especially today with the people that are working in those outfits. Because, listen, the Dairy Queen down here is case in point. I think a monkey could do a better job than a lot of the stuff down here. You think, you're like, you're being a little harsh. Listen, I'm probably being kind when it comes to that, because anyway, all that, I thought I had to go to the register and figure the thing out and try to get my Blizzard before all that was. Anyway, so all that to say is that if you're hardworking, you're going to end up moving up the ladder. And listen, you say, well, people are unfair and they have favorites and all that stuff. Listen, you got to put it into the Lord's hands too, because the Lord will promote those, and He'll cause it to be a case where maybe you move to a different job. If that's just not going to work out, He'll get you another position to another job, whatever. But if you're diligent, you're consistent, you're constant in what you're doing, then God will bless in that. Now, verse 27, so you're in Proverbs 12, 24, go down to verse 27. It says, "The slothful man roasteth not which he took in hunting, but the substance of a diligent man is precious. Now, what's this talking about? Well, I believe it's just talking about he's not a waster. And it talks about, Proverbs hits that too, talking about someone that's a great waster. And basically what it's saying is that, a diligent man, he'll use whatever he's got. Whatever he has, he kind of uses to its full potential, and he's not just wasting stuff, okay? And, that's what I believe it's talking about there. Now go to Proverbs 13, verse 4. Proverbs 13, verse 4. And honestly, we could probably just do a tour de force through Proverbs all day, talking about being diligent, not being slothful, talking about the ant, go to the ant, thou sluggard, and like all these different things as far as being diligent and being hardworking. But in verse 4 there, so Proverbs 13, verse 4 says, the soul of the sluggard desireth and hath nothing, but the soul of the diligent shall be made fat. Go to Proverbs 21. Proverbs 21 and verse 5. Proverbs 21 and verse 5. Now this is an interesting verse because now we're kind of dealing more so with the mindset of someone that's diligent. It says in verse 5 of Proverbs 21, the thoughts of the diligent tend only to plenteous, but everyone that is hasty only to want. Okay? And so, and want is meaning that you're in need of something, right? But the thoughts of the diligent tend only to plenteous. So what are you thinking about? Are your thoughts on things that are productive? Or your thoughts on things that are just frivolous and that's not going to help anything, right? And I'm not saying you can never have fun or, it's got to be work, 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 never have any fun. That's not what I'm talking about. But in general, you should be working. You should be doing something that's productive, okay? And the fun should be a side note, not the other way around. But today, in our day and age, everything's about fun and work is the side note. Okay, work is kind of like the necessary evil, right? But God created us to work, especially men, as far as working by the sweat of our face. We like that, okay? And honestly, we were helping brother Anthony move in and stuff like that. I don't hate that type of stuff. I mean, yeah, it makes you tired and all that stuff, but I don't hate it. I'm not like, this is awful. I kind of like it. I like doing things that are outside. I like doing things and I like building things. And so I like doing something to where I feel like, hey, I accomplished this. And there's that sense of accomplishment. And people that are diligent in their work and people that are hardworking end up being happier people. Let's just be honest. Because people that do a job that they feel like they've got a sense of accomplishment, they tend to be happy. And the reason that a lot of people are depressed in society is because they're lazy or that they have a job that they feel like is just not worth anything. And, as Christians, we should never be depressed in that aspect because you should be working for things that are eternal. And if you're constantly thinking about, hey, I won someone last week, or I went out soul winning last week, and we tried to give the gospel to someone last week, listen, that's profitable, and you should be looking at it like, hey, I'm not wasting my life. And that's the idea that a lot of people have. People that are slothful, people that are sitting in their mother's basement playing video games all day, they hate their life. Let's just be honest. They're going to be depressed, not only because they don't have a girlfriend, but because they are not fulfilling anything in their life. They're going to be depressed because it's just basically, what am I doing with my life, right? And so you have to look at that as far as being diligent. There's the idea of being profitable, but then there's the idea of just being happy, right? And that seems weird to people. They're like, well, if I work a lot, how in the world could I be happy? And it looks weird because obviously happy should be you're sitting on a beach somewhere sipping on a pina colada. Don't do that. But sipping on, let's say, a coconut or something like that, and you're just kind of sitting there. And I'm not saying this is sinful to do this every once in a while, but if that's your whole life, that's why you're here. We might as well just die and go to heaven because that's going to be better than that beach scene with your coconut. Does that make sense? And so going on, go to Proverbs chapter 19. I'm going to read to you Joshua 22. So Joshua has a lot in there about talking about the word of the Lord, and you're going to have good success. And it says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Well, in Joshua 22:5, it says, but take diligent heed to do the commandment and the law which Moses, the servant of the Lord, charged you, to love the Lord your God, and to walk in all his ways, and to keep his commandments, and to cleave unto him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. And if you remember at the end of Ecclesiastes, what's the conclusion of the matter? Fear God and keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. It's really that simple, but if you do that, guess what? You'll be happy. You'll have a lot of joy. You'll be rejoicing in your life because you're accomplishing something, and it's not going to be vanity and vexation of spirit. But people that work for the things of this life, and it's all about the boat, it's all about, possessions in this world, they're not going to be happy. It's going to be vexation of spirit. It's going to be vanity, and they know that to be true, right? Anybody that gets a new vehicle, and if that's like and I'm not against people that get new vehicles, right? But what I'm saying is if that is your intent in life, you're just like, it's all about that new vehicle. That's like what I'm looking forward to in life. You're going to be disappointed. Let's be honest, because that newness is going to wear off, and now you just have a big car payment. So all these things as far as what are you working for, whether it's eternal or not, but also, not being slothful. But in Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 15, it says, slothfulness casteth into a deep sleep, and an idle soul shall suffer hunger. So notice how slothfulness and idleness are linked. And I just wanted you to see that as far as being idle. Being idle and being slothful, being a sluggard, being lazy. Okay? We want to be diligent in our business. But also, we need to be diligent in good business, right? I'm not saying to be diligent in doing wickedness. Okay, that is business, I guess, but it's not the good kind. And so obviously what we're talking about is serving the Lord, doing things that we should be doing. But go to Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Now, a good way to know whether you're busy or you're working hard is how you sleep at night. Is it hard for you to go to sleep? Now, I know people have sleep apnea and stuff like that, so bear with me with that, meaning that if you have medical problems when it comes to sleeping as far as breathing and different things like that, don't take it too far what I'm saying here. But generally speaking, if you have a problem with going to sleep at night, it's probably because you didn't work hard enough that day. Okay? And this could be a mental thing too, meaning that if you just have you're working hard mentally as far as soul winning or studying and doing different things, you're going to be tired. Okay, but in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 11, it says, when goods increase, they are increased that eat them, and what good is there to the owners thereof, saving the beholding of them with their eyes? The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eat little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not suffer him to sleep. Now, what this is really kind of hitting on is the fact that if you have a lot of riches, you tend not to sleep well because you're worried about those riches or worried about losing those things. People that don't have that much, it's easy to go to sleep because you're like, well, if someone takes it, I don't have anything. So you're not worried about it, okay? But it also says, this is a great verse too to think about this, okay? In verse 11 it says, when goods increase, they are increased that eat them. What does that mean? Basically, let's say you get a raise, you have more money, you tend to spend that money. It's not, usually, you tend to live a higher life. Okay. Let's say everybody's salaries got doubled. Are you going to stay with the way you're living right now? Or would you increase that a little bit? Okay. Most people would probably increase that a little bit. And I'm not saying it would be sinful to increase it, but the smart thing would be is if you're living comfortable right now and then you got an increase, is to use that money for better things and not to be using it on things that aren't needed. Okay. But obviously if you got an increase and you're like, everything's broken and we got to fix some stuff. I mean, obviously that makes sense. You got to do what you got to do. But that's a great verse to show you that, and that tends to happen. People tend to live with the amount of money that they have, and the more money they have, they end up being in the same amount of debt, right? The person that's a millionaire could be in more debt than you, right? Because they're increased. That when their goods increase, they increase. Meaning that their expectancy as far as their lifestyle increases with that. But the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, meaning that someone that's not idle, someone that's working hard, and you know what? Most of the time, I don't make it to my bed. It's a problem. I'm really trying to help fix that because I wake up at 2 in the morning like, oh, I got to brush my teeth. got to do all this stuff, and I'm like, I don't want to do any of it. I just want to sleep. And because it's just, you get tired, you get in a spot, and you're just like, you just pass out, and you're just done, right? And many of you probably know what I'm talking about. And then you like 2 in the morning, you're like you're trying to crawl your way into your bed because it's not comfortable where you go to sleep at, right? It's always uncomfortable. You have like you got muscle spasms going on, all that stuff. So if you're in that case, you're probably working pretty hard. You're probably not in a case where you're being really idle or something like that, and especially those that have jobs that are more labor intensive. Okay, and so. But Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 3, so going up there, think about this too. What are you dreaming about? Okay? And I'm not one to say that dreams have a whole bunch of meanings. I tend to believe that dreams are just what you've been thinking about or what's on your mind, and the dream is basically predicated on what you were doing the day before or what you were thinking about the day before. But notice what it says in Ecclesiastes 5 verse 3. It says, "For a dream cometh through the multitude of business, and a fool's voice is known by multitude of words." I have some of the weirdest, craziest dreams when I've worked a really hard day. So, and you may be someone that doesn't remember your dreams, okay? So I'm not saying because you could have dreams and just not remember them, right? But there's times where I'm just like, that was the craziest dream I ever had in my life. But it's because you were just working so hard and you're thinking about a lot of different things, and you just tend to have dreams. And that's where I believe, if you're not doing anything and you're just idle and you're just kind of spaced out staring at the wall as the paint dries, so to speak, then you may not have a whole bunch of dreams because you're not doing a bunch of business. It's through the multitude of business you end up having dreams, okay? And so anyway, that's just some kind of ideas when you're dealing with that. But the big thing to deal with here, besides being profitable, is not getting into trouble. Meaning not getting into sin because you're not doing what you should be doing or you're being too idle. Go to 1 Timothy chapter 5. 1 Timothy chapter 5. So 1 Timothy chapter 5, and we're going to go down to verse 9, and we're dealing with widows here. And I'm not just going to preach about widows, but I'm going to deal with why it's good for younger women to marry, okay, and why it's not good to basically, be unmarried. If you're of the age to where you can be married, you need to try to do that. You need to try to be married because the tendency is to go into things that you shouldn't be doing. And so, in 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 9, it says, "Let not a widow be taken into the number under 60 years, having been the wife of one man." Okay, so what it's saying here, 60 years old means 60 years old. Okay, and so it's the way this words this is a little different, but what it's saying here is that we don't want to take a widow under basically the church is taking care of a widow. This is what this is talking about, is the church is going to pay, for the living and for all the expenses of a widow. Okay, and basically what it's saying is that let not a widow that's under the age of 60 be taking into this, meaning that if you're under the age of 60, you just need to get remarried. That's what it's saying. But if you're over the age of 60, and the way it words it here is actually verse 10 is talking about those that are over 60 that would be qualified. So just because you're over 60 doesn't mean you're qualified if you're a widow, right? Meaning that this is the qualifications for being a widow that the church would be chargeable for. In verse 10 it says, "Well reported of for good works, if she have brought up children, if she have lodged strangers, if she have washed the saints' feet, if she have relieved the afflicted, if she have diligently followed every good work." But notice in verse 11, "But the younger widows refuse." Okay, so you notice how it's wording that. It's basically saying that don't take a widow that's under 60, but here's the qualifications for those that would be taken in that would be 60 or above, right? And it goes through that. But then it says, "But the younger widows refuse." So all those that are under 60 refuse, okay? And it says, "For when they have begun to wanton against Christ, they will marry, having damnation because they cast off their first faith." You say, what in the world is that talking about? Well, what I believe this is talking about is that basically a widow that you would take into the church, that's a commitment that you're making, meaning that that person that's saying, I'm going to be a widow of the church and I'm going to basically serve the church as a widow. You think of Anna, the prophetess, right? That was a widow for like many decades, right? After she her husband died at a pretty young age, right? And you kind of think of that. She's serving in the temple. She's serving in the church or whatever. But what this is saying is that basically if you make that choice, let's say you're 40 years old and you've widowed, and obviously that's tragic, but then you say, listen, I want to be a widow of the church, and the church is going to be chargeable to me, meaning I'm going to get paid by the church and they're going to take care of me. And then let's say 5 years later, you're like, you know what, I'm going to go get married. That's what that's talking about. Meaning that you have to make the choice saying, I'm going to be a widow for the rest of my life if I'm going to be chargeable of the church. Does that make sense? So I believe that's what it's basically saying there, is that they cast off their first faith. Basically, they cast off what they said they were going to do. The commitment that they were making to the church as being chargeable to the church. You say, well, you know, that seems weird that you're forbidding to marry. No, they made that choice. If they wanted to remarry, if that was in their mindset, I'm going to remarry, then they shouldn't be chargeable to the church, and they shouldn't be. So it's basically an all or nothing if you're going to be chargeable into the church, okay, is what it's saying. And in this whole chapter, it's basically saying, listen, if you have family, they need to take care of you. This should be the absolute last resort, is that the church is taking care of you. But if it's legitimate, the church will take care of you, okay? But that's why it's saying, you know, the younger widows refuse, because they're going to marry, right? Let's say someone's a widow at 30. They're probably going to get remarried, okay? Now, notice in verse 13, this is why it's stating this, that you need, you know, the younger should get remarried, because if they're going to be a widow of the church and all this stuff, this is what's going to end up happening. It says in verse 13, and withal they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but tattlers also, and busybodies, speaking things which they ought not. So that's the danger, right? And so being idle, because you don't have a husband that you're taking care of, as far as like taking care of the house and all that stuff. You're just at the church doing these things. You're going to end up being idle, and then you're going to end up being a busybody and a tattler, and you're going to go from house to house talking about everybody's problems and talking about why, you know, fixing this or that. And and then it goes on in verse 14. It says, and I will therefore that the younger women marry, bear children, guide the house, give none occasion to the adversary to speak reproachfully, for some are already turned aside after Satan. So this is a harsh saying, because it's talking about they have damnation, they're being turned aside after Satan. It's because obviously if you're a busybody and a tattler, and you're doing all these things, speaking things which you ought not, then you're not doing the work of God. Okay, these people are all saved. Okay, we're not talking about unsaved widows here. We're talking about widows that are saved, that are not doing what they should be doing, and it's basically saying, if you're married and you bear children, you're not going to be idle. Does that make sense? If you're married and you have children and you have a husband that you have to keep the house and all this stuff, you're not going to be idle. And that's why he's saying refuse the younger widows, because they're going to be busybodies. They're going to be taddlers. And that's the idea as far as being idle. Okay, so you don't want to be a busybody in other men's matters. Okay, go to 1 Peter chapter 4. 1 Peter chapter 4, because this doesn't just apply to women. Listen, this applies to men. Men can be busybodies just as much as women. Now, women usually get the rap for being busybodies. And why do you think that's so? Because in history, time past, men were working throughout the day. They didn't have time to be busybodies and taddlers and all this stuff. But women that were being idle when they shouldn't be had a lot of time to do that. Okay? And so that's why a lot of times it's hitting that on the women, but in this case, I believe it's hitting on men as well, okay? Because I believe men can be busybodies just as much as women, and so it's something that we can all deal with, but it all comes back to this. If you don't have any time to be a busybody, you won't be a busybody, right? If you're working all day and you're just trying to get everything done, and you're like, I can't even get everything done, good. Because now you won't be a busybody. You won't be a tattler. You don't have time to get into drama. And you won't have time to even think about what everybody else is doing. Okay? And this is what it tends to be, is that people worry about what other people are doing more than what they're doing. And that's why they tend to be busybodies. Now, 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 14, it says, if ye be reproached for the name of Christ, happy are ye. For the Spirit of the Spirit of glory and of God resteth upon you. On their part he is evil spoken of, but on your part he is glorified. But let none of you suffer as a murderer, or as a thief, or as an evildoer, or as a busybody in other men's matters. So this is something that is very true that a Christian can do. because this is talking about a Christian. And so, and you say, you know, a murderer and a busybody, you know, that seems, why is that linked together? Well, I'm going to show you a great example of someone that was idle that committed murder and adultery. And go to 2 Samuel chapter 11. 2 Samuel chapter 11. You say, oh, you know, this never happened to me. It happened to the man after God's own heart. And this is a great lesson that we need to learn, is not being idle. And just a side note here, you know, when it comes to, some have asked me, you know, are you going to be full-time? Are you going to be a full-time pastor one day? Maybe. But this is my answer to that. Not if I don't have enough to do. Not if I can't fill 40 hours a week, at least. 40 hours a week of work, okay? And as of right now, it doesn't take me 40 hours to write a sermon, or write 3 sermons a week, okay? It doesn't take me that long, okay? And so therefore, I need to have a lot that I'm doing, and if I'm going to be idle, I don't want to do it, because I'm going to end up getting into trouble, okay? I'm going to end up, you know, I'll be watching things I shouldn't watch. I'll be reading things I shouldn't read. You know, I just get into the stuff. I'll be worried about what other people are doing when I should be worrying about what I'm doing. And you're going to get into problems. You're going to end up getting into fights that you shouldn't get into. And it'll just be a big problem. Right now, I'm busy. I'm busy because I have to write 3 sermons a week. I'm pastoring a church. I'm dealing with different things in the church. And then I'm also working 40 plus hours a week at work on something that's completely unrelated to the Bible, okay? So yes, I'm busy, but I want it to be that way, okay? I like it that way. You know what? I end up getting more done that way. Because the idle mind is the devil's workshop, and if I had more time to read the Bible, guess what? I wouldn't do it. If I had more time to memorize the Bible, guess what? I probably wouldn't do it. Every time I ever take a vacation, I'm like, man, I'm going to really get some Bible reading in. I'm going to memorize a lot. Never happens. The only time it ever happens is when I'm hunting, because I have nothing else to do. When you're sitting out in a tree stand and you're waiting for that swamp donkey to come by that never comes by. And, you know, that's the only time that I can think of where I take a vacation or I'm off from work that I actually get something accomplished. Okay? And so just generally speaking, and I'm not saying you couldn't do that, but that takes some willpower to take your free time and say, you know what, I'm not going to just relax. I'm actually going to, you know, put some mental work into what I'm doing as I'm on vacation. But in 2 Samuel chapter 11, this is the famous story of David and Bathsheba. In verse 1 there it says, and it came to pass after the year was expired, at the time when kings go forth to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the children of Ammon and besieged Rabbah, but David tarried still at Jerusalem. So get the story. This is how it's prefaced in the fact that this was the time that David should have been out there. David should have been king out there. This is when kings go out to battle, and he stayed. It says, but he tarried at Jerusalem. You know what that tells me is that if he would have went out to battle, he wouldn't have committed adultery with Bathsheba, and Uriah wouldn't have been killed or murdered. And it was all because of him being idle. And so you see the danger here, and you don't think that, you look at it and you're like, oh, that's not a big deal. He's not going out to battle. That's a big deal. It had massive ramifications on his kingdom because of it. And in verse 2 it says, and it came to pass in an evening tide that David arose from off his bed and walked upon the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman washing herself, and the woman was very beautiful to look upon. Oh, that's thing, you know, I thought the sleep of a laboring man was sweet. He couldn't sleep. Why? Because he's idle. Because he's not working hard. Therefore, he's having trouble sleeping at night. And why is he leaving his own bed to go look at some other woman? Well, there's other problems there, too, with his marriage with multiple wives. And so, obviously, that wasn't working out very well, too. So he had other problems in there. But being idle on top of that was the Achilles tendon, you know, that basically took him down. And so that's a great example. Now, for sake of time, I'm not going into the whole story, but you know the story, right? She ends up getting pregnant, and then Uriah comes back. He's trying to get Uriah to go back to his wife, and he won't do it. So then instead of, you know, just fessing up to what happened, he had Joab have Uriah go into the hottest part of the battle and have all the forces back off to where he was just out there alone to get killed. And so Uriah was killed, and it says that David killed Uriah with the sword of Ammon. And then after that, he marries Bathsheba, and then the child dies. And there's a lot of other things that happen after that, dealing with that. His son tries to take the kingdom away from him and all this other stuff. So see how just being idle can destroy your life? And that's how, adultery can happen. Adultery can happen because you're not busy. And that's where children are such a blessing when it comes to this. And you look at 1 Timothy chapter 2 and you wonder what that's talking about, how she'll be saved in childbearing. What do you think that's talking about? It's not talking about being saved from the labor and the child being born. It's talking about the fact that childbearing, having children, will save you from what? Being deceived. Because what was just talked about, Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in the transgression. And therefore, I will that the younger women marry, bear children, guide the house, to give none occasion to the adversary to speak reproachfully. And who was talked about in 1 Timothy chapter 2? The devil. The serpent's the one that beguiled Eve. And so that's why it's so important, to have that unit as far as children, because I'm not worried about my wife, cheating on me. She doesn't have time. Right? She doesn't have time to do that. But you know what? My job is that I need to be busy enough to where I don't have time either. Meaning that when I'm away from my family working, I'm busy to where I don't have time to get into that type of stuff, or even have that even be an option. Say, I'd never commit adultery. Wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. And anybody that says, I would never do that, they're in danger. You need to be in your mind saying, it's possible for me to do it, therefore I'm going to put up a bunch of guards. And one of the best guards you can put up is basically being so busy that it's impossible to happen. Like, I just don't have time. I don't have time to even think about it. Right? Where are your thoughts? Where's the thoughts of a diligent man? Well, it's going to be unto plenteous if you're diligent in your thoughts. But if you're slothful and idle in your thoughts, and you're slothful and you're idle in your actions, you end up getting into trouble. And go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. What this comes down to is that to be diligent, if you're diligent, you know what that's going to make you do? By default, it's going to make you mind your own business. Because if you're diligent in what you're doing, you kind of have blinders on. It's kind of like if you've ever been doing something that it just takes your whole attention. I'm like this because I can't multitask. It comes to texting somebody, I can't listen to someone else, right? So us men, we're probably just biologically programmed to be like, this is our task right here. We're worried about this task, and everything else is kind of foggy as far as what's going on. And so that's a good thing, though, because that means that if you're intent on doing something, you're focused in on something, then you're kind of not worried about everything else that's going on beside you. Okay? And so 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse 9, it says, But as touching brotherly love, ye need not that I write unto you, for ye yourselves are taught of God to love one another. And indeed ye do it toward all the brethren which are in Macedonia. But we beseech you, brethren, that ye increase more and more. And that ye study to be quiet, and to do your own business, and to work with your own hands, as we commanded you. That ye may walk honestly toward them that are without, and that ye may have lack of nothing. This is going to help you in the workforce. Someone that just gets their job done, is not worried about what everybody else is doing, and they're not taddlers, they're not busybodies. Listen, employers like that. They like when you're not just like telling on everybody and worried about everybody else. Because you know what that tells somebody? That if you're like saying, hey, this person's doing this person's doing this, that tells me that you're lacking in what you're doing. Because in order for you to know all this, means that you've been taking time out of what you should be doing to go figure that out. Okay? But it says to study to be quiet and to do your own business. You know what this means? And this is kind of a crass way of saying it. Just shut up and do what you're supposed to do. Right? That's kind of the contemporary way of saying it, right? But to be quiet and to do your own business. Basically just put your face down, just do what you're supposed to do, and not worry about what everybody else is doing. Okay? That doesn't mean, and don't take this the wrong way, this doesn't mean that you can't help people out. Like you're blind to what everybody's going through. What this means is that if someone's doing something over here, you're not criticizing and just saying, hey, why aren't they doing it this way? And they're just getting into everybody's business on what they're doing. Listen, unsought advice is rarely heeded. And if someone wants your advice, they'll ask you for it. And listen, when it comes to people in the church, I tend not to give advice unless someone asks me for it, okay? Unless it's like a serious thing where it has to do with church discipline, okay? But if it's something where someone's doing something or whatever, you know, you're like, all right, well, they're doing what they want to do. They believe that's what they should be doing. Then if they want to know my opinion, they'll ask me for it. But I'm not going to just butt myself in there. And I'm the pastor of the church. But I'm not going to just butt myself into all your lives and be like, listen, this is the way you should be doing it. This is more efficient. And, you know, one reason is I could be putting my foot in my mouth because I may not know what I'm talking about when it comes to those things. You may be like, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. This is more efficient the way I'm doing it. But go to 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. So 1 Thessalonians 4 and 2 Thessalonians 3 deal with this subject of working. And all of it has to do with doing your own business, being quiet, and minding your own business. Okay? And so if I get anything out of this sermon is that we need to be diligent in our business. One, to stay out of trouble. And two, just to mind our own business and not get into a bunch of strife that doesn't need to be there. Because being a busybody, you know, all that does is cause drama. And most of the time, the drama is something that's not needed. It's something that doesn't matter. And the great thing about, you know, a church that's doing the work of God as far as soul winning, and I think Brother Dave preached on this on one of the preacher's nights, as far as the fact that, you know what, we tend not to have a bunch of drama here because we're all soul winning. And everything kind of falls away. You know, like all the petty things, like that person eats with their mouth open, that person, you know, does this, you know, and I'm not pointing at anybody. But all I'm saying is that, you know, all those things that don't matter, because it really doesn't matter, right? It all falls to the wayside when everybody's like, we need to go soul winning. Or if you're out soul winning and let's say you get a little bit of persecution, and that those two people that were getting persecution may have some gripes about each other, that all falls away real quick. Because now you're in a battle together, and now you're basically fighting something together. You know, conflict usually brings people together. And drama falls apart when that happens. And so, you know, keep doing the work, and guess what? We'll have unity. Guess what? We won't have a bunch of drama. And if we're so busy, how can you be a busybody? Because in the Word means you have to be busy about that. Well, if you don't have any time to do it, then you can't do it. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 and verse 10. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10, it says, for even when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any would not work, neither should he eat. You know, tell that to Bernie Sanders and AOC. I'm not even going to say her name, but all these people that are for socialism. It says, verse 11, it says, for we hear that there are some which walk among you disorderly, working not at all, but are busybodies. Notice how that goes hand in hand. They're not working, then what are they doing? They're busybodies. They're idle, what are they doing? They're busybodies. They're not working with their own hands, what are they? They're busybodies. Notice how that's always coupled with not working, being idle, being slothful, not doing what you should be doing. And then it says in verse 12, it says, now them that are such we command and exhort by our Lord Jesus Christ, that with quietness they work and eat their own bread. You know, drink out of your own cistern. And under your own fig tree, you know, eat your own fruit. You know, this whole idea that, you know, what's mine's yours and yours is mine, that only applies to my wife and my children. Okay? You know, we joke about that because I'll have like a drink, you know, like a water, and she'll just like take it and suck it down. I'm like, how's my water? She's like, what's mine is yours. What's yours is mine, you know? But that's true in that case, you know, I can joke about that. But, you know, when you're married, we're one flesh. I mean, yeah, she's right, you know. Even though I was thirsty, it doesn't matter. But all that to say is that that doesn't apply to other people as far as my family that applies to. But everybody else, listen, get your own food, get your own water, you know, and, you know, it doesn't cross over like that. And, you know, be quiet in your work, okay? And so go to Ecclesiastes chapter 1. And I don't know if this really ties in, but I think about this. Listen. I don't want to know what everybody thinks about me. You ever think about that, you know? Because the idea is like, what are they saying about me? Keep that to yourself. I don't want to know, right? You know, you ever hear the term ignorance is bliss? Well, when it comes to drama, when it comes to tattling, when it comes to busybodies type stuff, ignorance is bliss. And I think of this verse, and this may not tie in completely with that, but in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 18, it says, "For in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increases knowledge increases sorrow." The more I know what people think about me, the more it's going to depress me, right? Let's just be honest, because they're going to be like, he has all these filler words. He's not good looking. Like, they'll say anything. People will say they'll have all kinds of different things they'll say about you, and just the way you talk, what you say, all this other stuff. And in the end, I don't really want to know. Okay? Unless it's like something simple I'm doing, okay? But if it's just like critiques on like how I am, my personality, just keep that to yourself, And it's okay for you to think that, I'm not against you. Everybody has their opinions. But that would go to anybody, right? Wouldn't you rather just not know if someone thought you were ugly or someone thought that you had a bad personality or whatever, right? And so I don't want to know all this stuff. But there are people that that's all they care about. They want to know what everybody thinks about them. They want to know every little detail. Someone was talking about you, was it good or bad? And don't tell me unless it's good. But I really do, and here's the thing. I don't necessarily want to know if it's good. You say, that's weird. Well, I don't want to be filled with pride. Because let's say everybody said something good about my preaching. Everybody said something good about my personality. Now I'm just going to be like levitating in here, and you won't be able to get my head out the door because it's just too much, right? And it could even be, it's not even flattery. It just could be good comments. People like certain things. And I'm not saying you can't compliment anybody. But what I'm saying is that when it comes to a lot of things like, we were all talking about you over here. It's like, okay, that's fine. I don't need to know everything you were talking about. And so there's always a flip side to that. But it all comes down to this. We need to be worried about what we're doing and not what everybody else is doing. Okay, go to John chapter 21. John chapter 21. I thought this sermon was going to be short. Well, I had to cut it off on my notes here. When I do these sermons that are more so kind of not necessarily a doctrinal sermon, I'm always like, it's going to be really short. But these are the sermons that I go off on rabbit trails. These are the sermons that I just like think of different situations, and then it gets really long, okay? Actually, the best sermons if it's just like boom, 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 here's all the facts. All right, let's pray. Those tend to do a lot better. Anyway, John chapter 21. Now, this is where Jesus and Peter are talking, and if you remember the story, he says, "Lovest thou me more than these?" And he says, "Thou knowest that I love thee." And he goes through that whole thing. Well, at the end of that, notice that Jesus is going to be talking to Peter about how he's going to die, or basically how he's going to serve him, and basically talking about the death that he's going to have. In verse 18, it says, "Verily, verily, I say unto thee, when thou wast young, thou girdest thyself, and walkest whither thou wouldest. But when thou shalt be old, thou shalt stretch forth thy hands, and another shall gird thee, and carry thee whither thou wouldest not. This spake he, signifying by what death he should glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he saith unto him, Follow me." So he's kind of giving him a little insight, and he's also showing him, hey, you're going to be old before you die. So that's kind of interesting, like you're not going to die young, you're going to be older, but it's not going to be the way you want it to go, right? Meaning that I believe this is talking about a martyr's type death, okay? People are going to take you where you don't want to go, meaning people are going to somehow kill you, right? Then he follows up and says, "Follow me." Notice what Peter says, okay? It says, "Then Peter turned about, seeing the disciple whom Jesus loved following, which also leaned on his breast at supper, and said, Lord, which is he that betrayeth thee?" So it's just kind of, first of all, it kind of seems weird, but what he's saying is that this is the disciple that said that, okay? So Peter's clarifying this is the disciple that was leaning on Jesus' breast, saying, "Who is it that betrayeth thee?" Right? Peter, seeing him, said to Jesus, "Lord, what shall this man do?" Now notice Jesus' response to this. Jesus saith unto him, "If I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee? Follow thou me." That's what he's saying. Mind your own business. Right? He's basically saying, what's it matter what happens to him? What's it matter what he does? I just told you what you're going to do. You follow me and don't worry about what other people are doing. And obviously this was, people thought this meant that that John wasn't going to die. But it even says that later on. It's saying, he didn't say that he wasn't going to see death. He's just saying, if I will that he tarry. So he's just basically saying, if he tarries till I come, what is that to you? What is it to you what he's doing? And that's the idea that we need to have. And I think about this when it comes to soul winning, when it comes to Bible memorization, when it comes to Bible reading. And you're saying, well, this person over here has all this memorized. What's that to you? Follow thou Jesus. Follow Jesus. You memorize what you're going to memorize. You read what you're going to read. You do what you're going to do. And don't worry about what everybody else is doing. You know what that's only going to do is going to bring you anxiety. Right? Because let's say you're not at the mark someone's at. Now you're constantly anxious saying, man, I need to get there. I need to get to where that person's at. But let's say you're above where that person's at. Now your anxiety is, I need to make sure I'm above them. Right? And you're like, they're catching up to me, and you get into this idea of like comparing yourselves. And go to 1 Corinthians chapter 4. 1 Corinthians chapter 4. This is what it comes down to, is that we need to judge nothing before the time. Okay? Now this doesn't mean don't judge anything. Okay? You got to take things in context, because in 1 Corinthians 4 it's going to say judge nothing before the time, but then in 1 Corinthians 6 it says, is there no one here to judge these matters? And he's rebuking them. Okay? So when he's talking about church discipline or people defrauding each other, he's like, you need to judge in these matters. But when it comes to comparing yourselves with somebody and saying, this person's above this person in Christianity or in spirituality, that's where it's wrong. That's where you're being foolish, okay, to try to say this person's above someone else, right? It'd be like me to say, well, Pastor Anderson's clearly above all of us. Why? And obviously I love Pastor Anderson. But people look at that because why? Because he's popular? Because, obviously he's doing great things. I'm not saying he's not. But do you see how people can hold people above other people? And there's like this hierarchy of who's more spiritual? And it shouldn't be that way. And what it comes down to is no one really knows yet. The Lord is who's judging our works and judging what we do. And we won't know until the end. And that's what it's saying here in 1 Corinthians 4. It says in verse 1, let a man so account of us as of the ministers of Christ, and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required in stewards it's required in stewards that a man be found faithful. But with me, it is a very small thing that I should be judged of you, or of man's judgment. Yea, I judge not mine own self. What's he saying here? He's basically saying, it doesn't really matter that you're judging me. It's such a small thing that you're judging me on this because it doesn't matter. Your judgment isn't going to change the cost of tea in China, meaning that it doesn't matter. It's meaningless. And he said, or any man's judgment. Notice in verse 4 it says, for I know nothing by myself, yet am I not hereby justified. But he that judges me is the Lord. Therefore, judge nothing before the time until the Lord come, who both will bring to light the hidden things of darkness and will make manifest the counsels of the hearts, and then shall every man have praise of God. What was just talked about in chapter 3? The judgment seat of Christ. What are we talking about? Rewards. And you don't have to confess to me, but you probably had conversations. Who's going to have the most rewards? Who's going to, maybe I'll have more rewards than this person or that person or whatever. Listen, that the Bible's saying don't judge anything before the time. And it's better not to even worry about it until the very end, right? Just do what you're going to do, and then you'll find out in the end, and you'll be surprised in the end, right? And either way you look at this could be a bad thing, meaning that you're looking at it and saying, and let's say you knew what you had, and then it wasn't much, and you're like depressed. Like, I did all this, and it wasn't that much. Or let's say it was a lot, and you're like, man, I already got all this stuff. I can just sit back, eat, drink, and be merry. Do you see how it could be bad either way you look at it if you knew what you were getting, or if you knew what other people were getting? That's why it's not going to be manifest until the very end, okay? And it says in verse 6, at the very end of that verse, in verse 6, it says that no one of you be puffed up for one against another. So that's why it's bad to be like judging on someone's spirituality, right? Romans 14:4, you don't have to turn there, but it says, who art thou that judgest another man's servant? To his own master he standeth or falleth, yea, he shall be holden up, for God is able to make him stand. And in that whole chapter, it's talking about doubtful disputations, things that don't really matter, right? Whether you eat meat or you don't eat meat, or whether you view a holiday as a holiday or you don't view it as a holiday. And it's all stuff that doesn't matter. It's not commandments. It's just basically how you do your life. And he's basically saying, who are you to judge another man's servant? He's not your servant. He's the Lord's servant. And it's by him that he's going to rise or fall or have rewards or not have rewards. Okay? But go to Galatians chapter 6. Galatians chapter 6. Galatians chapter 6. You have that famous verse in 2 Corinthians chapter 10 where it says, For we dare not make ourselves of the number or compare ourselves with some that commend themselves, but they measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves are not wise. Right? It's not wise to compare ourselves. So that's what it's talking about. It's not judge nothing before the time. It's talking about comparing yourselves among yourselves. And if you're diligent in your business and you have no time to even do that, then how are you going to do it? Right? And this goes all into tattling busybodies, because what do you think people are talking about? Like, well, oh, he's doing all this and he's not doing like what he should be doing, and he's not going enough, he's going a lot, like all these different things that people will bring up, and it's just not profitable. In Galatians chapter 6, notice in verse 4 it says, "But let every man prove his own work, and then shall he have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. For every man shall bear his own burden." So we need to mind our own business, deal with our own problems. And in that same chapter, it talks about that you bear ye one another's burdens. Okay, so it's not saying that you can't help people out, right? If they need help. But what it's talking about, here's the ideal situation, that you don't put your burdens on other people. That you deal with your own burdens. And if someone just sees you, hey, you have a problem there, you want some help, and then you're like, yeah, that's fine. But the difference is that if you're saying, listen, I got this problem, aren't you going to help me out? And you're kind of putting yourself, you're entitling yourself into someone helping you out, okay? And so you need to basically just deal with your own problems, and if people want to help you out with that, then great, But, that's where we just need to be minding our own business, not comparing ourselves among ourselves. What we should be doing is comparing spiritual things with spiritual things. You want to compare something, compare the Bible with the Bible, and worry about knowing the Bible yourself, worry about memorizing the Bible yourself, worry about going soul winning yourself. And obviously we're going out 2 by 2 and all that, but you need to be worrying about what you're doing, not what everybody else is doing. Okay? Now, people are going to be like, well, you're not for church. No, obviously if someone is in deep sin or there's a problem like that that's serious, then yes, you got to tell somebody. You got to tell me about it. That's a different issue. We're talking about things that aren't a big deal. Things, because someone could come to church and never go soul winning. They could never read their Bible. They never, memorize anything, right? And that's fine. And I'm not going to look at that person and be like, man, I'm going to have so many more rewards than them. Or I'm going to, whatever, and just kind of constantly, what's the point of that? And this is what we should be doing. Go to Philippians chapter 3. I'm going to end with this. Philippians chapter 3. Philippians 3, starting there in verse 7, notice Paul's attitude as far as what he should be doing. And notice he's not mentioning anybody else. He's talking about himself. And so we need to be selfless to others that need our help. But when it comes to our business and what we're doing, we need to be thinking about what we're doing and focus on what we're doing. And being quiet and working with our own hands and doing our own business and not being a busybody. And being diligent in what we do. But in Philippians chapter 3 and verse 7 there it says, "But what things were gained to me, those I counted loss for Christ. Yea, doubtless I count all things but loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord. For whom I have suffered the loss of all things, do count them but dung, that I may win Christ, and be found in him, not having mine own righteousness, which is of the law, but that which is through the faith of Christ, the righteousness which is of God by faith." Amen. Salvation by faith, not by works. Notice that he goes on here, though. It says, "That I may know him, in the power of his resurrection, the fellowship of his sufferings, being made conformable unto his death, if by any means I might attain unto the resurrection of the dead. Not as though I had already attained, either were already perfect, but I follow after, if that I may apprehend that, for which also I am apprehended of Christ Jesus." So what's it saying here? He's basically saying, I want to know him, I want to know Christ, and I want to try to attain unto the resurrection of the dead. Meaning I want to try to attain to where I'm sinlessly perfected. Basically, you're walking in the Spirit, you're in the new man, you're as if you're already at the resurrected state. Does that make sense? But he's basically saying, I haven't attained unto that. He's trying to, and he's trying to live such a life to where it's almost like he's walking in the new man at all times. Okay? And obviously no one's ever going to attain that in this life. We had the flesh. We're going to fail at times. But then he says, I follow after, if that I may apprehend that for which also I am apprehended of Christ. Now, apprehend is kind of like using the word know. Basically, I want to know Christ as much as I'm known of him. right? And remember, it talks about after you knew God, or rather are known of God, meaning that it's more important to be known of God to have salvation, right? Knowing God is a process, right? That's something that we're constantly trying to know more about God, know Him through His Word. And He's basically saying, I am trying to follow after that. I may know Him as much as He knows me. Does that make sense? And notice what He says in verse 13, how He's doing this. It says, brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended. But this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth unto those things which are before, I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. So your mindset should be saying, I'm forgetting about the things that are behind. I'm not worried about the mistakes I made in the past. I'm looking forward and I'm pressing toward that mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. And basically when you do that and you're diligent in what you're doing and you're busy doing the things of God, then you're not going to be a busybody in other matters. You're not going to be idle and get into problems and get into sins and things that you shouldn't be doing. And so you're going to be basically just moving towards that mark. And people that don't do the work of God, people that don't go soul winning, that don't go to church, they don't do what they're supposed to be doing, they're setting themselves up for that type of idleness, that type of getting into problems of being a busybody. And it can also turn into problems with adultery and different things that can happen because you're not busy in what you should be doing. And I said I was going to be last, but go to Philippians chapter 4, just one chapter over there. Notice what it says in verse 8. It says, finally, my brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. Right? So as a diligent man, our thoughts should be on things that are honest, just, pure, true, like all these different things, on the Bible, on the things of God. And if your thoughts are on that, what are you going to be dreaming about? If your thoughts are on that, what are you going to be getting into things that are wrong a lot of times? No. If you're doing that, and notice in verse 9 it says, those things which ye have both learned and received and heard and seen in me, do. And the God of peace shall be with you. So don't just be a forgetful hearer. Don't just think about it. Actually do it. And so if you're doing what you should be doing, if you're thinking about what you should be thinking about, and if you're diligent and you make yourself busy, okay, and you say, well, I'm already busy. Good. Stay that way. Okay, and don't seek to be someone that that just has a whole bunch of time to do nothing because you tend to do things that you shouldn't be doing, or you just tend to waste time, okay, and just not be productive. So, and if you say, well, I have a lot of free time, then get busy doing something, okay? Because that's just going to keep your mind in the right spot, okay? Get busy doing something that's productive or something that's just not a bad thing, right? And you say, well, I have to get a hobby, do something that's that's going to be just keep your mind on something, keep your mind working. And plus, that's going to help you as you get older too. Reading, working on things, keeping your mind going as far as having to do things and keeping focused on something. The worst thing is just to have a sedentary life, okay? I have a job that's sedentary in the way as far as physicality, but mentally it's not. Does that make sense? So, some people have more of a physical job, which is all physical, like moving stuff, and it's not necessarily a mental job. But then the other side is a mental job and not as much physical. I think the danger actually is more so on my side where I could get into the idea of being lazy, okay? If you have a job that's physical, you have no choice, right? Like, I can't get the job done, I got to do what I got to do. There's really no choice, and that's a good thing, that, you got to be physical, and you're going to be tired, and you're going to be busy. The harder thing is when you're in a job where you can slack off a lot easier, and you can, get into things you shouldn't be doing. And so you say, well, who are you preaching this to? I'm preaching to myself too. Listen, when it comes to this, I'm constantly saying I need to be diligent. I need to not be lazy. I need to not be slothful. I need to not be idle. And here's the thing. You may say, well, we're all in that spot. We're all being busy. We don't have a lot of free time. The idea is that you stay that way, okay? Meaning that in the future, if you have an option to do something, let's say our church got big enough to where it can support me. I'm not just going to jump on that unless I know I'm going to be busy, okay? And my mindset is, honestly, and you may say, I don't agree with that. I'd rather hire a deacon and still work full time, You say, oh, what do you mean? Because a lot of the stuff that would take more time is not necessarily like Bible related. Okay, it could be things with dealing with the finances of the church, or dealing with just different things. It's not really like, it doesn't take like biblical knowledge, or it doesn't take like that whole oversight of a pastor that you have to do it. And so I'd rather just have someone else do that, and pay them to do that. And so that's my mindset. And so I'm not saying I never would be full-time, because if we got big enough, it just makes sense. Why not? But it's got to make sense. And this is one of the big reasons why I would choose not to, maybe, in some cases, because I do not want to be idle. I don't want to just be like, well, we can do it. They can afford to put me on, but now I'm just going to be sitting around twiddling my thumbs for half the day. Okay? And so that's a sermon, a man diligent in business, in his business. And that's something we need to strive to do. And if you're already doing it, good. Stay that way. But if you say, well, there's some areas where I'm a little idle, work on it. And there's areas, I'm just going to be honest, there's areas in my life where I'm just like, I think I don't spend enough time doing this. I spend too much time on the relaxation end of things. And, I'm constantly trying to tweak that to be like, instead of doing this, I'm going to do this. And I'm trying to get into that mode. You don't want to burn yourself out. Everybody needs rest. Everybody needs a little bit of time where you don't have to think about something. Don't take it the wrong way to say it's just work, sleep, work. Obviously there's times where you can relax. We can cut it up. We can have fun. All that's true. So, but let's end with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this morning, and I thank you for everybody here at Mountain Baptist. And I pray that you be with those that couldn't make it this morning. Pray that you be with those that are traveling. And Lord, just pray that you be with the health of our church as far as those that haven't been feeling well. And Lord, just pray that you heal us from any sicknesses. And Lord, I do pray that you'd help us to be diligent in everything that we do for you. Help us not to be idle, not to be slothful, but to be ever just trying to do more for you. And Lord, we love you and pray all this in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.